Hi, it's been a while, but I'm back with another self-esteem video, and because it's almost the beginning of a new school year, I'm in my classroom in my lovely book nook to talk to you about a surprisingly controversial topic, one that's very straightforward for us English teachers, but for writers and readers, especially as you get more into the nitty-gritty of, I guess, more literary fiction, it becomes a surprisingly controversial topic, and that is the humble quotation mark. Now, we all know what quotation marks are and what they do. They enclose speech in written text, so that if I am writing a passage of narrative and a character starts talking, the quotation mark begins when they open what they have to say and ends when they close what they have to say. But what's interesting to me is the extent to which quotation marks are starting to disappear in more literary fiction. Now, if what you read is sort of mainly mainstream commercial fiction, you probably have not noticed this trend as much. I'm sitting here, for example, in front of a display of books that basically the common thread is I thought some of my students might find them interesting. And as I look through them, I see mostly quotation marks, standard use of quotation marks. Quotation marks, standard quotation marks. Oh, no quotation marks here, although I will say dialogue is set off with a dash at the beginning. Not in every case, some cases. On the other hand, I was in my own house at my own bookshelves the other day browsing through some Newfoundland literary fiction and checked out some books I'd read recently for presence or absence of the good old quotation mark. Lisa Moore, no quotation marks. Michael Winter, not the one. Samuel Thomas Martin, I love this book by the way, but innocent of quotation marks. Gerard Collins, Finton Moon, quotation marks in the traditional fashion. Keep the faith, Gerard. Hang in there. So while the vast majority of writers are still using quotation marks in the traditional way, it is becoming kind of a thing, particularly among literary fiction, to drop the quotation mark. I personally have a problem with this as a writer. I think I have a problem with this as a reader, but I discovered something interesting that I'll tell you about later when I went back to look at books I had actually read. But first, let's talk about my problem with it. The quotation mark serves a really useful function. It indicates the difference between text that is meant to be spoken aloud and text that is not. Without the quotation marks, there's a little more confusion. There's that moment when we think, was this said out loud? This is particularly true, by the way, if the writer is writing in first-person present tense, because that's the tense we all speak in. Let's say I'm writing a scene in which my first-person character is very unhappy with her life at the moment, and she's thinking about that while enjoying a snack with a friend.
How's the tidbit, Trudy?
Not that good. It's kind of dry and tasteless, like my life. You see the problem. Without the quotation marks, it's unclear. Is like my life something my character said out loud, eliciting a kind of what the heck response from her friend? Or is it something she merely thought internally? You could play the scene again with traditional quotation marks and create a different effect.
How's the tidbit?
Not very good. It's kind of dry and tasteless.
Sorry.
Obviously, there are other ways of indicating this. You can say, I said, I thought. But the quotation marks do the work for you. They're a handy shortcut that most people recognize. Now, obviously there are ways around this and authors find them, but what I'm interested in is why people do or don't. And I've seen some good explanations. I've seen people say that dropping the punctuation gives them more freedom, that they like the fluidity of the text. The worst explanation I've seen probably comes from one of the writers who's most famous for dropping the quotation marks, and that's American writer Cormac McCarthy, who in an interview kind of famously said that one of the reasons he doesn't use quotation marks is he doesn't like to see the page cluttered up with little black marks. I have news for you, Cormac McCarthy. Once you have started writing words on the page, that battle is already lost. It's already cluttered up with little black marks. Text, by definition, is little black marks. Why would you pick on just the quotation marks? I really think it's an aesthetic preference. Some people like it better and some people don't. I think most readers prefer to have them. Some writers prefer not to. I will admit I have been cynical about this trend in the past, and I once wrote a very, very scathing blog post, which I will link down below if you want to read me being scathing, about how a lot of writers, I think, are doing this just to make their work look more literary and trendy. However, I found out something interesting when I actually did a review review of 20 books which have won major literary prizes. Over the last 5 years, I looked at the winners of Canada's two biggest awards, the Governor General's and the Giller Prize. I looked at the American winner of the National Book Awards and the International Man Booker Prize. And among those 20 works of fiction, I looked to see how many use punctuation marks in the traditional way. I was actually kind of surprised to discover that 17 out of 20 still did. Now, this included a couple of short story collections where the authors used quotation marks in some stories and not in others. But if they did in the majority, then I counted it as one that used them. So what that tells me is that the trend away from quotation marks is not as widespread as I had the impression it was, because an awful lot of big literary prize winners are still using them, although some are choosing to drop them. What was also interesting to me was that I had read a lot of these books, and when I looked back over them, I realized I did not have an accurate memory of whether or not quotation marks were used. There were books that I thought had used them that didn't, and books that I thought that didn't that had used them. So although it may be annoying to me while I'm reading to read a book without quotation marks, afterwards it doesn't affect my perception of how much I enjoyed the book or how it lingered with me. There are books I have loved that have not used quotation marks. Despite this, for my own writing and for the foreseeable future, I'm going to come down on the side of continuing to use punctuation marks in the traditional way. And apparently I'm in good company there with 85% of recent major winners of literary awards. So that's a good thing. However, I'm reminded of the story of one writer of my acquaintance who did not use punctuation marks in her latest novel and was apparently verbally accosted by a reader in a public place who got very angry with her for not using them. And I want to do here what, I feel like maybe Donald Trump, for example, has not adequately managed to do with his followers, which is to say, even if you agree with me, I do not advocate the use of violence, either physical or verbal, against writers who drop the punctuation. It's never going to be my favorite thing, and I don't think we're ever going to get away from it or get to the point where we don't see quotation marks as the norm anymore. But I'm not angry about the trend either, or at least not as angry as I used to be. Also, Cormac McCarthy apparently doesn't like semicolons. You will pry the semicolons from my cold, dead hands. That and the Oxford comma. Maybe you shouldn't just get me started on punctuation. Kind of dry and tasteless.
Sorry.
No, that was perfect. Oh, the sorry was for the Timbit, not for your
I'm sorry your Timbit is dry and tasteless.
Thank you.